The phone buzzed at 6:12 a.m., the sound sharp enough to cut through the thin winter quiet of Brookfield, Ohio, like a knife tapping a glass. Ethan Miller was already awake, not because he was rested, but because worry had trained his body to hover near consciousness the way a smoke alarm hovers near panic. He lay on his back in the narrow bed of his rented duplex, staring at the faint water stain on the ceiling that resembled the state of Michigan if you squinted and forgave it. The buzz came again, closer this time, vibrating against the wooden nightstand as if the phone were impatient with him, as if it had somewhere important to be. Ethan reached for it with the careful slowness of someone who expected bad news. The screen lit his face blue. One missed call, no name, just a number he didn't recognize, from an area code that made his stomach tighten in a way that felt familiar and humiliating. His thumb hovered. The buzz of the refrigerator in the kitchen downstairs filled the silence, along with the faint whistle of wind squeezing through the imperfect seal of the front door. He listened to the voicemail without sitting up, the phone pressed to his ear, his eyes tracing the cracks in the ceiling like they might rearrange themselves into an answer. Hey, this is, sorry, bad connection. Just calling about, yeah. Call me back when you get this. Click. That was it. No name, no company, no explanation, just the sound of someone clearing their throat, the echo of movement, a voice that sounded official enough to matter and casual enough to be dangerous. Ethan stared at the phone until the screen dimmed. Missed calls had become symbols in his life, the modern version of unopened letters or doors that closed softly behind you. He missed calls from debt collectors, from old friends who didn't know how to help, from job listings that promised competitive pay and delivered silence. But this one felt different. It arrived early, before the town woke up, before excuses had time to form. Outside, Brookfield was wrapped in that specific Midwestern winter gray that wasn't dramatic enough to be cinematic but persistent enough to be exhausting. Snow from the night before lay in uneven patches along the sidewalks, dirty where tires had churned it into slush, pristine where it clung stubbornly to lawns that no one had walked across yet. The streetlights hummed, their orange glow fading as dawn pushed weakly against the clouds. Ethan sat up, rubbed his face, and swung his feet onto the cold floor. He was 34 years old and owned exactly one pair of boots that didn't leak. He pulled on the boots now, not because he planned to go outside immediately, but because they made him feel prepared. Prepared was a costume he wore often. Downstairs, the kitchen smelled faintly of burnt coffee from yesterday. He rinsed the mug, filled it again, and waited for the drip machine to sputter to life. His reflection in the microwave door looked older than he felt and younger than he feared becoming. Dark circles under his eyes. Hair that refused to choose a direction. A face that suggested he'd once been optimistic and hadn't quite recovered. The phone sat on the counter. Silent. Watching. He replayed the voicemail. Then again. Call me back when you get this. Ethan exhaled through his nose. Call who back? About what? His mind filled the gap aggressively. Job interview follow-up. Loan reconsideration. A callback from the temp agency he'd visited last week, where the waiting room smelled like stale carpet and desperation. He imagined himself missing something big because he'd slept through it, because he'd been tired, because his life had narrowed into a series of almosts. By 6:35, he was dressed. Jeans, a thick flannel shirt layered under a grey hoodie, the jacket with the broken zipper that required a careful angle to close. He checked the number again, then typed it into Google. Nothing useful. He considered calling back immediately, then decided to wait until a reasonable hour, which in Brookfield meant at least 7. At 6:47, his neighbor's truck roared to life next door, the engine coughing like it had a long-standing grievance with winter. Ethan flinched anyway. By the time the clock hit 7 o'clock, he had convinced himself the call was either very important or completely meaningless, which somehow felt worse. He called back. It rang. Once. Twice. Then went to voicemail. Hi, this is Ethan Miller. I'm returning a call from this number. You left a voicemail earlier. So, yeah, call me back. He winced. It sounded inadequate the moment it left his mouth. He hung up and stared at the phone like it had personally betrayed him. By 7:12, he was outside, breath fogging the air as he scraped ice from the windshield of his aging sedan. The car complained the way only cars from the early 2000s could, metallic-sized, reluctant starts, a dashboard light that blinked without explanation. As he drove toward Main Street, Brookfield began to wake around him. The town was small in the way that made everything feel interconnected. Red brick storefronts with hand-painted signs. A diner that had never updated its menu because it had never needed to. A library that smelled like dust and quiet ambition. Houses built in decades when optimism had been cheap and lumber had been plentiful. Ethan pulled into the parking lot of Rosie's diner, the tires crunching over leftover snow. Rosie's was where you went when you didn't want surprises. The bell over the door jingled as he stepped inside, the warmth hitting him immediately, along with the smell of bacon grease and coffee that had been refilled more times than anyone could count. "Morning, Ethan," said Marlene from behind the counter. Marlene had worked there longer than Ethan had been alive, and her voice carried the authority of someone who knew everyone's business and chose kindness anyway. "Morning," Ethan said, sliding onto a stool. She poured him coffee without asking. "You look like you lost a bet with sleep." Something like that. He checked his phone again. Nothing. At the other end of the counter, Frank Delgado was already halfway through his breakfast, the newspaper spread out like a territorial claim. Frank nodded at Ethan. "Cold enough for you? Give it time," Ethan said. The diner filled slowly, boots stomping, jackets shrugged off, voices overlapping. Ethan tried to listen, tried to stay present, but his attention kept snapping back to the phone. When it buzzed again at 7:26, he nearly spilled his coffee. Unknown number. Same one. He answered too quickly. "Hello?" Static. A muffled voice. "Yeah, sorry, I think I got the wrong." "Wait," Ethan said, louder than he intended. "You called me earlier." Pause. "Did I?" "Yes, this morning." Another pause. Sorry about that. I was calling about. Actually, never mind. My mistake." Click. Ethan stared at the phone in disbelief. Around him, the diner continued as if nothing monumental had happened. Forks clinked. Someone laughed. "That sounded intense," Marlene said, sliding him a plate with 2 eggs he hadn't ordered yet. "It was nothing," Ethan said, though his chest felt tight. Frank folded his newspaper. "You look like someone just told you your life was a typo." Ethan forced a smile. "Feels about right." He paid and left early, the bell jingling behind him like punctuation. Outside, the sky had brightened slightly, the gray thinning into something that might become light if given enough time. He drove next to the hardware store, convincing himself he needed salt for the sidewalk. Inside, the air smelled like wood and metal and old advice. Shelves towered with tools that promised solutions if you just knew which one to choose. Ethan called Pete Halloway from aisle 3. Pete wore the same flannel every day and believed deeply in practical jokes that only amused him. "You hear about the thing?" "What thing?" Ethan asked. Pete raised his eyebrows dramatically. "Oh, you didn't hear?" Ethan's phone buzzed again. He answered without looking. "Hello?" A woman's voice this time, crisp and hurried. "Is this Ethan Miller?" "Yes." "Hi, I'm calling regarding..." A loud crash interrupted her, followed by muffled apologies. "Sorry, about the..." Actually, I'll have to call you back." Click. Ethan lowered the phone slowly. Pete whistled. "You okay, man? Do you ever feel like the universe is prank calling you?" Pete laughed. "Only on weekdays." Ethan left without buying salt. By late morning, the missed calls had multiplied, each one adding a layer of confusion. One from the school, his sister's name mentioned but not explained. One from the library, asking about a book he didn't remember checking out. One from a number that hung up immediately. He ran, literally ran, slipped once on an icy patch near the town square, arms flailing, dignity scattering across the snow. A group of high school kids laughed. Ethan laughed too, because sometimes laughing was cheaper than anger. At the library, Mrs. Kaplan peered at him over her glasses. "You left your phone number on a volunteer form," she said. "We called to ask if you could help with the winter reading program." "Oh," Ethan said, embarrassed. "Sorry, I thought it was something else." She smiled. "Most things aren't." At the school, his sister laughed when she saw him. "You okay? You sounded like the building was on fire." "I thought something was wrong." She shrugged. "Just a reminder call." By the time Ethan reached the town square again, snow had started falling lightly, the flakes small and tentative. He stood there, phone in hand, breathing hard, surrounded by ordinary life continuing stubbornly onward. It buzzed once more. Same number. He answered calmly this time. "Hello, Ethan Miller," the voice said, clearer now. "This is Jordan Reeves from Northline Logistics. I tried reaching you earlier about the operations coordinator position. We reviewed your application." Ethan closed his eyes. "Yes, we'd like to move forward. If you're still interested." The snow fell. The town breathed. Ethan smiled, a laugh escaping him that sounded like relief and disbelief tangled together. Yes, he said. I'm very interested. The call ended, and Ethan stood there, phone warm in his hand, surrounded by a town that had unknowingly tested him all morning. The missed calls hadn't been mistakes. They'd been mirrors. He tucked the phone into his pocket and started walking home, snow crunching under his boots, the weight in his chest lighter than it had been in months. The snow was still falling when Ethan Miller finally stopped moving. He stood just off the edge of Brookfield's town square, boots planted in a thin layer of fresh powder, phone resting heavy in his palm like a decision he hadn't made yet. The bells from St. Agnes finished their noon song, the sound stretching out and dissolving into the grey winter sky. Around him, life resumed its steady rhythm, cars rolling past, a couple arguing quietly near the pharmacy, kids laughing somewhere down the block. But Ethan felt suspended between moments, like the town had exhaled and forgotten him for half a breath. He looked down at the screen again. Still nothing. No callback. No voicemail. Just the same missed call time-stamped hours earlier, now stripped of its mystery and yet somehow heavier than before. For the first time that day, Ethan didn't immediately redial. He slipped the phone into his jacket pocket and let his shoulders drop. The tension that had been pulling him forward all morning, dragging him from the diner to the hardware store to the library and back again, finally loosened its grip. What replaced it wasn't relief. It was something quieter. Acceptance, maybe. Or curiosity. What if, he muttered, it really was just a call? The thought felt almost rebellious. He turned and walked toward the coffee shop on the corner, the newer one that had opened after the old video rental place shut down. Inside, the heat wrapped around him, fogging his glasses. A few people from town were already there, coats draped over chairs, conversations layered like background music. Rachel Nguyen sat near the window, laptop open, scarf still wrapped loosely around her neck. She looked up as Ethan approached, recognition lighting her face. "Hey," she said, "you survive your emergency." Ethan smiled, embarrassed. "Still pending." She gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Sit. You look like you ran a marathon emotionally." He laughed and sat, resting his elbows on the table. "Is it that obvious?" Rachel shrugged. "Small town. We notice things." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the hiss of the espresso machine filling the gaps. Ethan stared into his coffee, watching the steam curl upward. "I missed a call this morning," he said finally. Rachel raised an eyebrow. And I kind of lost my mind about it." She smiled gently. "Sounds human." Ethan told her the story, the unknown number, the redialing, the panic, the sprint through town that felt ridiculous even as it happened. He told it with humor now, exaggerating the spilled coffee, the icy sidewalk, Officer Reynolds' knowing look. Rachel laughed at the right moments, shook her head at others. When he finished, she leaned back in her chair. "So what do you think the call was?" Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it again. "I don't know. A job, maybe. Or nothing. Or," he stopped himself. "I think it became bigger than whatever it actually was." Rachel nodded. "That happens." He looked up. "To you too?" "All the time," she said. "Especially when I'm scared something won't come through." The words landed softly but firmly. Ethan felt them settle. After a while, they parted ways, Rachel back to her work, Ethan back into the cold. The snow had thickened, covering the earlier footprints. The town looked freshly reset. Ethan walked instead of rushed. He passed the diner again, where Linda Parker waved from behind the counter. He waved back, smiling this time without effort. Tom Bradley mimed answering a phone and shrugged theatrically. Ethan laughed out loud. By the time he reached his apartment, his phone buzzed. He froze. Slowly, deliberately, he pulled it out. Voicemail notification. His heart kicked up, but it didn't sprint anymore. He stood there, snow collecting on his shoulders, and pressed play. A man's voice filled his ear, slightly distorted. "Hi, this is Caleb Johnson from Brookfield Logistics. Sorry we missed each other earlier. Just wanted to follow up on your application. Give me a call when you get a chance." That was it. No dramatic music, no urgent crisis, just a calm, ordinary opportunity. Ethan laughed, a real laugh this time. He shook his head, breath puffing into the cold air. "All that," he said aloud, "for this." He went upstairs, kicked off his boots, and sat on the edge of his bed. For a moment, he didn't call back. He let the silence sit. What struck him wasn't that the call had been important. It was that his reaction to it revealed everything he'd been carrying: fear, hope, pressure, pride. The missed call hadn't caused the chaos. It had exposed it. Ethan dialed the number. This time, it rang. The conversation was short and straightforward. An interview, nothing promised, nothing guaranteed. When he hung up, he didn't feel saved. He felt steady. Over the next few days, the story of Ethan's frantic mornings spread through Brookfield the way stories always did. Trimmed, embellished, laughed over. People teased him gently. Linda asked if he wanted a bell installed for incoming calls. Tom Bradley suggested a town-wide alert system. Ethan took it all with grace. He'd earned it. More importantly, he noticed something shift in himself. When bills came in, he opened them instead of stacking them. When applications went unanswered, he followed up calmly. When his phone buzzed, he checked it, but he didn't let it own him. The interview came and went. It went well. It went honestly. Weeks later, on another grey morning, Ethan walked through town again, phone in his pocket, coffee warm in his hand. Snow melted along the sidewalks. Brookfield carried on. He paused at the square, listening to the bells. Some calls would be missed. Some opportunities would pass. But he understood now that the most important answer wasn't always on the other end of the line. Sometimes, it was simply choosing to stop running and start listening.
Like and subscribe if you want to be happy and motivate.